So today we're going to talk about something a little bit different, and that is a show I saw in Tokyo called Fuerza Bruta, I think is how you pronounce it. Now this is a show that started in Buenos Aires in 2003, so it's not a Japanese show, but it does incorporate a lot of cultural elements into its performance. And when I was in Tokyo, it was a massive just celebration of everything aesthetically Japanese. It is incredibly difficult to do this show justice in just words, so I think from this point forward I am just going to show you all the pictures that I could take while I was there, kind of give you a little bit of narration and see what you think for yourself. The show started before we even went into the auditorium. We were led down a corridor lined with flowing sheets and lit with dark reds that suddenly changed to blue, projecting images of the sea onto the sheets. We were then brought into a smaller room where we were surrounded by samurai that rounded us up and organised us into a circle. The music was progressively getting louder and louder the longer they did nothing, until they suddenly smashed something over the head of one of the audience members. That audience member then had confetti falling around them as the styrofoam brick broke in half. They did this to a number of audience members, myself included, before we were ushered into the next room. It was large and looked pretty bare except for 3 giant masks hanging from the ceiling. The music faded out and the room became silent before a spotlight was shown on a platform high above us. 4 acrobats stood on the platform yelling at us, words we couldn't even understand, as an overwhelming drum beat played in the background. Then the acrobats jumped and swung into the air above our heads. They reached out to us and we raised our hands to touch them as they swung back and forth like the pendulum of a giant grandfather clock. They were always just a couple inches out of reach. The pendulum then started to swing higher and higher until the acrobats it was made up of disappeared from sight. Another huge musical drum beat drew our attention to the stage, over which the masks hung. And we were suddenly drawn into a concert made up entirely of drum sets. I don't know how long we would have stood transfixed by this if the samurais had not re-entered and started separating the audience into 2 lines, creating a large space in the middle of the auditorium. We were a very confused audience. We just stood there looking at each other, as I'm sure not many of us knew what we were walking into when we bought our tickets. We had seen nothing yet. A huge platform housing a treadmill was wheeled into the empty space with a samurai mounted on it. He was not like the samurai we had already encountered. They were all dressed in red, whereas he was in black. He also removed his helmet. I defy anyone to decipher the story of Fuerza Bruta, but my head was telling me this man was a rogue samurai. He started running on the treadmill, getting faster and faster. Before long, he was accompanied by wind and rain, but he kept running until he collapsed on the ground. A white screen was then placed between us and the treadmill, and all we could see were silhouettes. Our rogue was approached by another samurai, and they circled each other until our samurai drew his sword, and before we know it, there was blood splattered across the sheet, and our rogue was the only one left standing. The sheet was then removed and he started running again, this time chased by 3 red samurai who dropped off the treadmill after failing to catch him. Of all the segments of Fuerza Bruta, this one was the most story-driven. I hesitate to call it my favourite as there were so many other elements that are a contender for this title. However, this is the one that always comes to mind when I'm talking about the show. The next thing I always remember are the geishas dancing on the ceiling. As crazy as that sounds, we had been conditioned to expect the unexpected at this point. However, that conditioning did nothing to prepare us for the giant fish tank that was lowered over our heads. Women pushed their faces into the bottom and smiled at us through the water. They moved gracefully around, making shapes with their bodies. We were just starting to get comfortable again when they started standing and throwing their bodies on the tank. Of course it wasn't going to break, but it shifted, and we, the audience, shifted with it. They continued to throw themselves around before lying flat and smiling at us again, as if to say, "Got you." Many unique and colourful interpretations of hell have described this kind of madness. This is what I believe hell would look like if it were in fact paradise. So does that sound like something you would be interested in? If the answer is I don't know, I'm not surprised. It is something that just has to be seen to be believed. I couldn't do it justice if I had infinite time and infinite words. And I'm sure, depending on the city you see it in, you will see different cultural celebrations. But the one I saw in Japan just used the Japanese aesthetic brilliantly. At least to a foreigner's eyes. But if you're interested in something that is a cross between Cirque De Sole, performance art, and a crazy nightclub, then I'm sure you'll find something you like at this crazy, incredible, one-of-a-kind show.